A faint glow slipped under the door, the first sign that something in my world was off kilter. It was a Monday, maybe a Wednesday, those days all blurred together, each one dull and gray, seeping into the next like a faded watercolor. My house, usually so still it felt like a silent shrine, seemed alive that day, humming with a faint rhythm from upstairs. Over the howl of the autumn wind rattling the pine trees outside our remote Oregon home, I caught a soft, pulsing sound, something so subtle I shouldn't have noticed it at all. Marcus, my husband, was barely a presence, even when he was around, slipping out before dawn and dragging himself home after dark. He left behind only traces, a whiff of burnt coffee and the tense air of corporate stress lingering in the rooms. That left just me and Silas, his younger brother, a restless 24-year-old stuck in our house after some unspoken twist in his life's path. He was supposed to be holed up in his room, maybe sketching or reading, filling the endless, empty hours with whatever kept him occupied. Maybe he was just craving a cup of tea, I thought, a small moment of human connection to break up the monotony. That idea felt like a lifeline, so I held on to it as I climbed the creaky old stairs, each step groaning like it carried the weight of my own exhaustion. As I got closer to his room, the sound sharpened, not a song, not a video, but something rawer, more human. The door stood slightly open, a careless slip-up. I hesitated, my hand raised to knock, but my eyes drifted to the gap, and in that moment, my whole world seemed to tilt. Silas sat on the edge of his bed, his back half turned to me, his face bathed in the ghostly blue glow of his laptop. He was completely absorbed, his posture rigid with focus. It was the angle that gave him away, one small step to the side, a tiny shift in my view, and the reflection on his glossy screen hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't a movie. It was a live feed, a mirror of reality. My blood felt like it turned to ice in my veins. The camera, angled up from a desk, captured the slow rise and fall of someone sleeping, dark hair spilling across a white pillowcase, my hair. It was a video of my bedroom, of me, asleep just moments before. A small gasp slipped out of me, a weak sound lost in the vast hallway, but it was enough for Silas to hear. His body jerked, going stiff as a board, and he snapped the laptop shut with a loud crack, plunging the room into a darkness that felt sharp and violent. The silence that followed buzzed with an electric tension, heavy and overwhelming. When his eyes finally locked onto mine, they were wide, brimming with the raw panic of an animal caught in a snare. A flush crawled up his neck, staining his face a deep, guilty red. "Amelia," he managed, his voice rough and barely audible. "I thought you were asleep," I finished for him, my own voice sounding distant, like it belonged to someone else entirely. I stood there, frozen, while my mind spun like a storm. A strange, nauseating warmth spread through my chest, clashing with the cold dread in my veins. It was disgust, yes, and violation, but buried deep, almost too deep to admit, was a tiny spark of something else, validation. In a house where I'd faded into the background, someone had been watching me, utterly fixated. "The door," he mumbled, flailing a hand toward it uselessly. "I swear I meant to shut it." "I should have knocked first," I said, the words tumbling out as a weak attempt to share the blame, to make this surreal moment feel less wrong. I turned and bolted, my heart pounding like a frantic bird trapped in my chest. Down in the kitchen, I pressed my hands against the cool granite counter, desperate to anchor myself. What had I just witnessed? Why wasn't he just watching something normal, like any other 24-year-old might? This was deliberate, personal. This was about me. At 37, I thought I knew shame's terrain, its dips and valleys from years of my own regrets. But this was something else entirely, a new kind of darkness. It wasn't just shame, it was a secret we now shared, a poisonous thread tying us together. A few minutes later, Silas appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking like a man awaiting a verdict. He'd swapped his shirt, but he still wouldn't meet my gaze. "Amelia, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice clear and earnest but nowhere near enough. "You have to believe I never meant for you to see that. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I echoed, my tone sharper than I meant it to be. Was it watching me sleep, or just getting caught? He flinched like I'd slapped him. The silence between us grew heavy, suffocating, like a fog we couldn't escape. For 8 months, we'd lived in this house like strangers, orbiting each other without ever touching. Now, our worlds had crashed together, shattering the rules we'd lived by. "I'll start dinner," I mumbled, desperate for any excuse to move. He stayed rooted in place, his haunted eyes tracking me as I walked away. The days that followed were a dance of avoidance, both of us gliding through the house like ghosts. Our silence grew, heavy and oppressive, filling the space between us. We ate Marcus's bland, pre-made meals at opposite ends of the long dining table, the clink of forks and knives our only dialogue. The secret pulsed between us, a raw, unhealed wound. I could feel his eyes on me when I turned away, like a shadow brushing my skin. Then, one rainy afternoon, he broke the tension. He found me in the living room, staring out at the crying sky. He perched on the ottoman across from me, hands nervously clasped between his knees. "We can't keep doing this," he said quietly. "Amelia, what I did was wrong, unforgivable, I know. But this silence is eating me alive. Please, I don't want this awfulness, to destroy everything." I should have been icy. I should have been raging. I should have told him to pack his things and go. But looking at his earnest, pained face, all I felt was bone-deep exhaustion and that dangerous flicker of connection. "What do you expect me to say, Silas?" "Say something, anything," Silas pleaded. "Call me a creep, scream at me, just don't stay silent." So I let it all spill out. I told him what it was like to feel invisible in my own home, like a shadow no one noticed. I shared how loneliness had carved a hollow ache in me, one Marcus didn't see anymore, lost as he was in his endless work and ambition. I didn't let him off the hook for what he'd done, but I painted a picture of the empty, aching world where his betrayal had taken root. As my words poured out, I saw his face soften. The guilt still lingered in his eyes, but something else flickered there too, a spark of understanding dawning. When I finished, he let out a shaky, heavy sigh. "You're the only thing in this house that feels real," he murmured, his voice so quiet I barely caught it. He lifted his gaze, and his eyes held a strange, intense fire. "And I'm not the only one who's watching." The air between us buzzed with tension. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, my voice sharp. He froze for a moment, a flash of panic crossing his face, like he'd let something slip. He raked a hand through his tousled hair. "I just noticed things," he said quickly. "Like how you lingered a second too long looking at that delivery guy last month, holding his gaze like you were starving for it." Heat crept up my face, burning my cheeks. He was right, a brief, fleeting moment when a stranger's eyes had seen me, really seen me, not just passed over me like I was part of the furniture. And Silas had caught it. He'd caught me. "I see you," he went on, his voice quieter, deeper. "The way you rub the back of your neck when you're stressed out. How you stand by the window every morning, hoping for sunlight even when it's pouring. I notice everything." His words weren't an apology anymore, they were something else, a raw confession. They felt like a rope thrown across the silent gap that had kept us apart. And in that moment, I felt a rush, terrifying and thrilling, as I took a step toward it. Every wall I'd built around my life, my marriage, my sense of who I was started to crumble. From that day, things changed between us. The cautious distance we'd kept melted into a risky curiosity. We started talking, really talking, sharing stories, finding out we both loved those old black and white movies. We'd watch them late at night, sprawled on the big couch, always a safe space between us. But that space wasn't empty, it crackled with an electric pull, a graze of his hand when we both reached for the popcorn bowl, the warmth of his leg just inches from mine, laughter that felt too close, too personal. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just two lonely souls finding comfort. But deep down, I knew it was a lie, a beautiful, dangerous lie that felt too good to stop. One night, sleep just wouldn't come. My mind spun with endless what-ifs, every one of them circling back to Silas. This had to end. I had to be the grown-up, rebuild the boundaries before we both got lost in the wreckage. With a surge of desperate determination, I slipped out of bed, the cold floorboards biting at my bare feet. I headed to his room, my heart pounding like a drum, ready to tell him, kindly but firmly, that this connection was a fantasy we had to let go. His door was open just a crack, as always. A single lamp cast soft shadows across his room. He was asleep, lying on his side, his face calm in the dim glow. But my eyes weren't on his face. The sheet had slipped down to his waist, and in the faint light, his boxer shorts revealed the clear, undeniable outline of his arousal. He was dreaming, lost in sleep, and my carefully rehearsed words, my resolve, everything I'd planned to say dissolved in a wave of heat that stole my breath. My body was turning on me. I should have bolted. I should have been repulsed. Instead, I stood frozen, once again a voyeur, caught in a storm of shame, desire, fear, and a wild, electric curiosity. After what felt like forever, I stepped back and gently pulled the door shut, my heart still racing. Back in my bed, the cold sheets felt like they were mocking me. The spark inside me had roared into a wildfire. The line between right and wrong wasn't just blurred, it was gone, burned to ashes. There was no turning back now. A few nights later, the clumsy scrape of a key in the front door broke the late-night quiet. A heavy thud followed, paired with a muffled curse. It was Silas, and he was drunk. The racket was loud enough to wake the whole house, even Marcus, who woke at the slightest sound. I threw on my silk robe and rushed out, reaching the foyer just as Silas stumbled inside. His eyes, glassy and unfocused, struggled to find me. When they did, a slow, lopsided grin spread across his face. "Amelia," he slurred, his voice thick with liquor. "Are you some kind of angel?" "Silas, hush, you'll wake the dead," I whispered sharply, grabbing his arm to keep him upright. He was heavier than I expected. "Marcus will hear you." His gaze wandered, lingering on the neckline of my robe. "You're gorgeous," he said, his voice low and rumbling. "Has anyone ever told you that, or am I the first to see it?" My heart skipped, tripping over itself. "That's just the booze talking," I said. "Come on, let's get you to the kitchen. You need coffee." I half pulled, half carried Silas toward the kitchen, his arm draped heavily over my shoulder, his body radiating a warmth that seeped into me, making my skin prickle with awareness. In the dim glow of the kitchen, I eased him into a chair, his weight slumping against the wood, and turned to the coffee maker, my hands trembling so badly I could barely press the buttons. He reached for the glass of water I'd set in front of him, but his drunken fingers fumbled, and it slipped, crashing to the tile floor in a spray of shards and liquid. "Silas, for heaven's sake," I whispered sharply, my voice tight with frustration as I grabbed a roll of paper towels from the counter. I knelt to sop up the mess, the cold floor biting at my knees, and glanced up to see him watching me, that soft, lopsided smile still clinging to his face despite the chaos. "You're always picking up after everyone, always taking care of everything," he slurred, his voice low and warm, like he was sharing a secret he'd been holding on to for too long. "We've got to get you upstairs, and you'd better keep it quiet," I said with a firm edge to my voice, pulling him to his feet with a determined tug, my hands gripping his arm tightly to keep him steady as he wobbled. Climbing the staircase felt like navigating a treacherous path, each groan and creak of the old wooden steps echoing in the stillness, threatening to rouse the entire house, my pulse racing with the dread that Marcus might stir in the bedroom just down the hall. Once we reached Silas's room, he swayed on unsteady legs, his fingers fumbling clumsily with the buttons of his shirt, each attempt more futile than the last, like a weary child grappling with an impossible puzzle in the dim, shadowed light. Every shred of common sense screamed at me to walk away, to leave him to his mess and retreat to the safety of my own room. But seeing him struggle, so vulnerable and lost, something in me softened, and before I could think better of it, I stepped closer. My fingers brushed against the warm skin of his chest as I reached for the first button, the contact sending a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. The air around us turned thick, almost suffocating. All I could hear was our breathing, uneven and heavy, filling the quiet room. Silas went still, his hands dropping to his sides, the drunken haze in his eyes replaced by a sharp, clear focus that burned into me. "I've had enough of this pretense, Amelia," he said, his voice low but resolute, carrying the weight of a decision he'd clearly wrestled with and settled. I stood frozen, my fingers still gripping the hem of his shirt, the fabric soft and warm beneath my touch. "What pretense?" I managed to ask, my voice wavering, betraying the unsteady rhythm of my heart. "This game we keep playing," he replied, his eyes locking onto mine with a fierce, unwavering intensity that pinned me in place. "We've both seen things we weren't meant to see, caught glimpses of truths we weren't supposed to know. And don't act like you haven't thought about it, I see it in your eyes, that flicker when you think I'm not paying attention, when you let your guard down for just a moment." A chill ran down my back, prickling my skin. "Silas, this is wrong," I said, but the words sounded hollow, even to me. A faint, bittersweet smile curved his lips. "We left wrong behind a long time ago. Stop pretending you don't feel it too." He stepped closer, closing the small gap between us, and I could feel the warmth radiating off him. His hand lifted, his fingertips brushing along my jaw, soft as a feather but sparking a jolt that shot through me. Then his lips met mine. It wasn't a timid kiss, one that hesitates or searches for permission. It was bold, fierce, and ravenous, a floodgate bursting open, releasing every secret glance, every quiet moment of tension that had been simmering between us for weeks. My mind, usually a whirlwind of worries and second guesses, went still, as if someone had flipped a switch. All my doubts and fears melted into a soft, distant hum, drowned out by the intensity of the moment. I knew I should have pushed him away, told him to stop right then and there, to put an end to this reckless moment. But instead, my hands, which should have pressed firmly against him to halt this dangerous dance, rested gently on his chest, feeling the warm, steady thump of his heartbeat beneath my palms, grounding me in the intensity of the moment. When he finally pulled back, his eyes locked onto mine, raw and searching, as if he were desperately seeking something in my gaze, perhaps approval, perhaps absolution for what had just passed between us. "We're done pretending, Amelia," he murmured, his voice low and gravelly, slicing through the stillness of the room like a blade. My throat tightened, as if the air itself had grown too heavy to breathe, each inhale catching like a sob I refused to release. My fingers, trembling with a tangled mix of fear and longing, reached for the delicate sash of my silk robe. With slow, deliberate movements, I untied it, the soft fabric whispering against my skin as it slipped open, bearing my vulnerability to the dim light of the room. "No more pretending," I whispered, my voice soft and fragile, barely carrying in the quiet, as I surrendered to the undeniable pull of the moment, to the raw truth we'd both been sidestepping for too long. The silence between us was thick, charged with unspoken words and the weight of years spent circling this precipice. His eyes, dark and searching, held mine with an intensity that made my pulse stutter. Every step he took closer felt like a thread snapping in the fragile tapestry of my restraint. My heart pounded, a wild rhythm that drowned out reason, urging me towards something I couldn't name but could no longer deny. The cool night air brushed against my exposed skin, a stark contrast to the heat rising within me, as if my body itself was caught in a battle between surrender and control. I took a shaky breath, my gaze flickering to the floor, then back to him. "We can't keep running from this," I said, my words trembling but resolute, cutting through the quiet like a blade. The space between us seemed to shrink, the world narrowing to the unspoken promises and fears that had tethered us here, to this moment where pretense could no longer hold. My hands hovered at my sides, uncertain, yearning, as I waited for him to bridge the final distance, to meet me in this reckless, inevitable truth. The world around us seemed to collapse inward, shrinking until it was just this small, dimly lit room, this fleeting heartbeat of time. I heard the faint rustle of my robe slipping to the floor, felt the mattress give softly under my weight as I sank onto it, my pulse pounding so loud it echoed in my ears like a drum. Silas leaned over me, his silhouette blocking out the faint glow of the lamp, casting a shadow that felt both protective and dangerous. "Don't be afraid," he murmured, his voice gentle, like a warm hand smoothing out the jagged edges of my nerves, even as my heart raced with the weight of what we were doing. But a sharp stab of fear cut through the fog of want. "Silas," I whispered, my breath catching in my throat. "Marcus, he's so close. We have to stay quiet." My throat tightened, as if the air itself had grown too heavy to breathe, each inhale catching like a sob I refused to release. My fingers, trembling with a tangled mix of fear and longing, reached for the delicate sash of my silk robe. With slow, deliberate movements, I untied it, the soft fabric whispering against my skin as it slipped open, bearing my vulnerability to the dim light of the room. "No more pretending," I whispered, my voice soft and fragile, barely carrying in the quiet, as I surrendered to the undeniable pull of the moment, to the raw truth we'd both been sidestepping for too long. The silence between us was thick, charged with unspoken words and the weight of years spent circling this precipice. His eyes, dark and searching, held mine with an intensity that made my pulse stutter. Every step he took closer felt like a thread snapping in the fragile tapestry of my restraint. My heart pounded, a wild rhythm that drowned out reason, urging me towards something I couldn't name but could no longer deny. The cool night air brushed against my exposed skin, a stark contrast to the heat rising within me, as if my body itself was caught in a battle between surrender and control. I took a shaky breath, my gaze flickering to the floor, then back to him. "We can't keep running from this," I said, my words trembling but resolute, cutting through the quiet like a blade. The space between us seemed to shrink, the world narrowing to the unspoken promises and fears that had tethered us here, to this moment where pretense could no longer hold. My hands hovered at my sides, uncertain, yearning, as I waited for him to bridge the final distance, to meet me in this reckless, inevitable truth. A knowing, almost dangerous smile flickered on his face, his eyes glinting with something that sent a shiver down my spine. He leaned in, his breath warm against my ear, carrying the faintest hint of whiskey and resolve. "I know," he said softly, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through me, igniting every nerve. That shared secret, the thrill of my husband sleeping just a room away, was like gasoline on a fire, it made everything burn hotter. It was the final line we crossed, a boundary shattered in the heat of that moment, where the weight of consequence felt distant compared to the pull of desire. The room seemed to pulse with the intensity of our choice, the air thick with the scent of my perfume and the unspoken. His hand brushed against mine, a fleeting touch that felt like a spark, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned into it, my breath catching as the space between us vanished entirely. The world outside that moment, my life, my vows, the safety of the ordinary, faded into a blur, drowned out by the roaring certainty of what we both wanted. His fingers traced the edge of my jaw, slow and deliberate, as if memorizing the shape of this transgression. "This changes everything," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a vow. And in that moment, I didn't care what it would cost, only that it was ours. I shut my eyes, clutching the sheets as a wave of heat and sensation crashed over me. I bit my lip to keep from crying out, the danger of our silence making every touch electric. Silas moved with a careful, quiet intensity, like he understood exactly how fragile and reckless this moment was. It was overwhelming, the heat, the hush, the enormity of what was happening inside me. My body shuddered, a silent cry I forced myself to swallow. When it was done, we lay tangled in the sheets, our breaths slowly evening out. Silas, spent and still tipsy, drifted off almost instantly. I slipped out of the bed, my legs heavy, like they belonged to someone else. I draped a blanket over him, then locked his door from the outside, a pointless gesture, like trying to cage a storm after it had already torn through. In the shower, the hot water stung my skin, but guilt didn't come. Not yet. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, like the world had snapped into focus. My body felt loose, my mind clear, like the stillness after a wildfire. I'd crossed a threshold, and deep down, I knew the woman I'd been before tonight was gone for good. But this wasn't the end. It was a spark, the start of something bigger. A fleeting rush of desire is simple, something you can tame. But what we'd set loose wasn't just a flame, it was a crack in the earth, and the ground under my carefully built life was already trembling. The truth isn't something you can hide forever. It's like a seed buried in the dark, sooner or later, in the most beautiful or devastating way, it always breaks through to the light.